to get people who will talk about Mr. R.K. Talwar. The difficult personality the students of K J Somaiya have got, but they have tried to bring the personality through the narration that they are going to do. Welcome all to this session of celebrating Indian managers who made a difference, and the episode is on Mr. R.K. Talwar. I'll request Dr. Pankaj Trivedi to say a few words and then ask the students to please make the presentation of the audiovisual that they have created on the personality that we are celebrating today. Over to you, Dr. Pankaj Trivedi.
Thank you, madam. Good evening to all of you, and welcome to the series of Indian managers. I would like to first of all thank at the outset Bombay Management Association as well as Dr. Kavita Lagate in particular for giving us this wonderful opportunity. Why I'm saying this opportunity? Because when the students are involved in these kind of projects, students have to go beyond classroom. And that is something which is very important when they are studying at postgraduate level. Simply knowledge from the textbook and knowledge that they get from the classroom is not enough. When they are involved in these kind of projects, they are forced to collect information about those great management personality. And in the process, they will learn the qualities which made them so great. They will be able to learn from their life what is to be done, what is right, what is wrong, and many other things. So this opportunity is given this time to our institute, and thank you very much, madam, for that. I would also like to appreciate the students team. They have put up a very good effort, as madam has already said, and we are waiting for students to make presentation. Best of luck. Thank you.
Thank you. We can start the
presentation. We can start, right?
Honesty is the best protection, is the message that greets everyone in the lift lobbies of the Mumbai corporate office of State Bank of India. It was painted at the instance of a great leader, who was the chairman of the bank at the time the building was commissioned. Greetings everyone. On behalf of the Bombay Management Association and K J Somaiya Institute of Management, we welcome you to the Wednesday Wisdom webinar. The great leader I just mentioned about is none other than Mr. R.K. Talwar, the lion that scared the rulers. And today, we shall talk about how he made a difference in the world of Indian managers. Mr. R.K. Talwar took his MA degree in mathematics from Lahore University. He then immediately joined the Imperial Bank at Lahore in November 1943 as probationary officer. He was superintendent of branches and superintendent of advances in the Bengal Circle of the State Bank of India and inspector of branches under Central Office. In 1961, he was appointed deputy secretary and treasurer in the Bengal Circle. A year later, he moved to the Madras Circle in the same capacity. He became the first secretary and treasurer of the Hyderabad Circle when it was created in 1965. In January 1966, Mr. Talwar was appointed as secretary and treasurer of the Bombay Circle. On 1st February 1968, when he was appointed as one of the two managing directors of the State Bank, he became the youngest to adorn that office. A new chapter in the banking industry began with professional bankers taking positions as bank chiefs, when Mr. Talwar became chairman of the State Bank of India on 1st March 1969. The youngest chairman ever, he gave a sense of direction and a new orientation to the bank as never before. Besides expanding the bank's business manifold by extending its reach, his missionary zeal saw the State Bank take several initiatives in the areas of innovative banking, rehabilitation of industries, credit plans for rural development, and many others. He ensured simplification of procedures for financing small-scale industries and launched new schemes for the benefit of smaller enterprises, small businessmen, and agriculturists. He also put in place systems to ensure proper end use of bank funds besides comprehensive analysis of corporate balance sheet much before the Reserve Bank of India prescribed norms for credit analysis of large advances. It was again his rare vision and foresight that initiated the first ever organizational restructuring exercise of the State Bank in 1971, which withstood the test of time for well over 3 decades. When he left the bank on 3rd August 1976, he was only 54. By then, hailed as one of country's most distinguished bankers, Mr. Talwar had galvanized the bank by his vision, dynamism, and dedication. He was undoubtedly the golden era of State Bank. He decided to settle in Pondicherry, but his connections with the corporate world did not cease as he served on board of companies and headed the Industrial Development Bank of India for a couple of years in the late 1970s. Mr. Talwar's name is closely linked with the issue of customer service as he was the chairman of the Committee on Customer Service. Today, whenever customer service related issues are discussed and debated, the far-reaching recommendations made by Mr. Talwar Committee are often quoted. We can keep talking about his achievements and the whole day will seem shorter. Such was his ambition. But it is not his achievements which makes him unique in the annals of leadership. Mr. Talwar's exemplary character, moral courage, and spiritual dedication earned him respect and admiration from everyone who came into contact with him. His accomplishments are merely the results of these values. All through his career, he gave the best to nurture a culture of openness, frankness, and transparency in the bank and bitterly opposed arbitrary decisions. A man of exceptional attributes and indomitable spirit, with an abiding faith in the grace of the divine and honesty and integrity as his guideposts. Mr. Talwar commanded respect both within and outside the bank. To him, principles dear to his heart were above all else, and never was he ready to compromise with them. Mr. Talwar groomed, mentored, and inspired many officers who later rose to the pinnacles of their careers. To name a few of them, Mr. Ramesh Sobti, MD and CEO IndusInd Bank, currently serving as non-executive independent director at Adani Green Energy Limited. Mr. Prateep Chaudhary, former SBI chairman from April 2011 to September 2013, and one of his most notable subordinates, Mr. N. Vagul, who later became the chairman of Industrial Credit and Investment Corporation of India, ICICI, and widely recognized in India for his role in pioneering the concept of universal banking.
Talking about Mr. Talwar without even touching the Talwar Amendment will leave our meat in vain. N. Vagul, who was at that time the subordinate of Mr. Talwar, has summarized that moment in an excerpt, The Lion That Scared the Rulers, dedicated to Mr. R.K. Talwar. And today we shall take you back when the government had to amend the laws in the parliament in order to get rid of Mr. R.K. Talwar, which became well known in banking circles as the Talwar Amendment. Back then, the nation was under the state of emergency. The economy was undoubtedly passing through a difficult phase at that time. The 1971 war with Pakistan on the issue of Bangladesh had left many scars, and several marginal companies were facing considerable difficulties. One of the borrowers of the bank, a cement company, became sick with mounting losses and approached the bank for restructuring assistance. The State Bank of India, being the largest bank, was involved with most such enterprises and was always ready and willing to give a helping hand to rescue these companies. What made the problem difficult with respect to this specific company was the strong assessment by the bank that much of the difficulties of the company were brought about due to gross mismanagement. And given this assessment, the bank insisted that as a condition to implementing the restructuring package, the chairman of the company, who was also the CEO, should step down from the management and a professional management should take over the company's management. This was standard prescription by the bank in similar circumstances, and it was invariably resisted by the promoters till they reached a stage when it was difficult for them to carry on without the bank's help. In this specific case, also, the promoter strongly resisted any attempt to dislodge him from the management position, but the bank held its ground. But then the promoter turned out to be different. He was a friend of a famous politician and decided to take his case directly to him. This turned out to be a minor irritant for him. He called the finance minister and asked him to direct the bank to waive this requirement. As far as he was concerned, he had given his decision and should have seen the end of the matter. But the problem was the government was dealing with a different person, R.K. Talwar, who was not used to taking orders from the government. The finance minister telephoned Mr. Talwar and asked him not to insist on a change in management as a condition to restructuring. Mr. Talwar called for the details of the department and, having satisfied himself with the merits of the case, informed the finance minister that it would be difficult for the bank to waive the requirements of change in management. The finance minister sent for Mr. Talwar and told him that he had received instructions from the highest authority in the country, who expected him to carry out the orders without demur. Mr. Talwar stood his ground and told the finance minister in no uncertain terms that there was no way for him to waive this requirement and the bank's position would remain unchanged. The finance minister got the instructions to sack Mr. Talwar, but the finance minister faced two sets of problems. Mr. Talwar, during the 7 years he was the chairman of bank, had achieved a high sense of personal reputation, and his removal from the office for what could be called a trivial issue would send shockwaves in the industry. The finance minister could, however, manage this because this was a period of emergency, and what could have caused a stir in the normal times would pass off as not unusual in the extraordinary circumstances prevailing in the country. The second problem was much more intractable. When the matter was referred to the legal department pointed to the specific provision in the State Bank of India Act which guaranteed the chairman the special protection against removal without sufficient cause. The finance minister therefore felt that a better course of action would be to offer Mr. Talwar a different assignment or seek his resignation. He sent for Mr. Talwar again, told him that the government was planning to set up a banking commission to make recommendations and with regard to the restructuring of the functioning of the banking system, and whether he would be willing to accept the chairmanship of the commission. Without batting an eyelid, Mr. Talwar told the finance minister that he would indeed be happy to head the commission and he could carry out this job simultaneously with his existing assignment as the chairman of the state bank. When the finance minister looked somewhat uncomfortable with this suggestion, Mr. Talwar very calmly looked the finance minister in his eyes and told him, "Mr. Minister, you seem to be very particular that I should not continue as the chairman of the State Bank of India. Is that correct?" The finance minister replied, "Yes, Mr. Talwar, you know what the problem is. We all have the highest regard for your abilities, but unfortunately, you do not seem to be very flexible on this one issue, which is of great importance to the highest authority of the country. If you do not want to accept any other position, I may have no option but to seek your resignation or, in the alternative, to dismiss you from service. This would be extremely painful for me, but I would be left with no other option." Mr. Talwar replied, "Mr. Minister, I have no intention of resigning from my position. It is entirely up to you to decide whether you want to dismiss me. In any case, I have just a little more than a year left in my second term, and I see no reason why you should not allow me to complete it." The finance minister then terminated the interview and hoped that some solution would be found. Instead, CBI was told to investigate Mr. Talwar to find out whether there were any grounds on which he could be dismissed. In terms of Mr. Talwar's personal reputation for honesty and integrity, which was quite well known, and in the normal course, it would have been virtually impossible for any investigating agency to charge him with any misconduct. He, however, had two chinks in his armor. One was his almost monthly visits to Pondicherry, which attracted widespread attention both within the bank and in the political circles. His attachment to his mother and the Aurobindo ashram was well known, and he made it clear to the government when the issue once came up for discussion that he needed these visits for what he called recharging the batteries, and that if, as a condition of his employment, he were to stop these visits, he would as well step down from the bank. The agency was trying to construct a sufficient cause for his dismissal in terms of the act, but the agency could find no ways to charge Mr. Talwar with abuse of his position. While the CBI closed the case, the finance minister was directed to amend the State Bank of India Act to provide for a summary dismissal of the chairman. The legislation amending the State Bank of India Act was passed in record time and received the assent of the highest authority without any delay. Armed with the new provision in the Act, there was no alternative but to remove Mr. Talwar in terms of the new provision. But Mr. Talwar was defiant. On the evening of 4th August 1976, Mr. Talwar received a fax message from the finance minister sanctioning him 13 months leave and asking him to hand over charge to the managing director. It is amazing that with all the powers in their hands, the government could not summon up enough courage to dismiss Mr. Talwar, but instead gave him a leave preparatory to retirement for as long as 13 months, which he did not ask for. This was the respect he commanded in the industry.
What are the qualities or values of a leader not professed in lips but lived in action which create a lasting impact on people? Here are the qualities which Mr. R.K. Talwar possessed which left a long-lasting impact. 1. Compassion and fairness. One such instance from his career which shows how a true leader can be at once firm, compassionate and fair in dealing with people or a difficult situation was when his junior officers called off a strike regarding their working conditions and remuneration. Mr. Talwar was sympathetic to some of their demands, but before he could put his mind into the problem, the officers' union called for a work-to-rule agitation followed by a strike. Mr. Talwar felt that this kind of unionism and agitations are harmful to discipline and efficiency of the bank. He took a firm stand that there would be no negotiations unless and until the officers called off the strike. But the officers' union was adamant and the strike dragged on. Finally, a settlement was reached in favor of the bank and the strike was called off. It was after this that the finance minister of the government of India rang up to Mr. Talwar and asked him to sack the officers and show no mercy on them. To which Mr. Talwar politely replied, "Sir, you have been kind enough to leave the handling of the strike to me. Why don't you leave this issue to me? They are, after all, my colleagues and I will decide how I deal with them." We can see how Mr. Talwar was compassionate in dealing with the erring workers, though he was firm in dealing with the striking employees. He was also courageous in not yielding to the demands of the political bosses. Second, honesty, truthfulness and integrity. He lived the ideal life of truthfulness with the austere and fanatical rigor. One such instance was when he was planning a trip to Kolkata and an invitation for lunch had come from a senior industrialist at Kolkata, which Mr. Talwar had accepted. A few days later, he received a communication from the mother of Shri Aurobindo ashram at Pondicherry that during his visit to Kolkata, he should avoid eating food outside his home. So, he called his secretary and told him to draft a communication to the industrialist saying that it would not be possible for him to attend the lunch. His secretary drafted the letter writing that he had some unavoidable commitments. But while signing the letter, Mr. Talwar called and told his secretary that he could not sign the letter as this was not truthful, since he had in fact no unavoidable commitments. His golden words were, "It is important that we should never utter a lie, even though it is not necessary for us to broadcast the truth." Such a firm and total commitment to truth, as in the case of Mr. Talwar, is a very rare quality among the leaders. Third, humble. Often we have seen big leaders not tolerating anything which hurt their self-esteem. But Mr. Talwar would never take offense at certain remarks at which lesser mortals would have taken. An instance was when he visited the bank's staff college in Hyderabad and addressed a gathering of newly recruited probationary officers. One impish officer asked him what qualities made him chairman of the bank. Mr. Talwar politely replied that there was nothing extraordinary in him but devotion to duty and blessings of the divine. As Einstein has correctly said, more the knowledge, lesser the ego. Lesser the knowledge, more the ego. Clearly, Mr. Talwar was a man of wisdom, and this is what separates him from the rest of the crowd. Fourth, the spiritual foundation. We are now brought to the question, what is the deeper source of Mr. Talwar's achievement as a leader? It is not entirely mental or moral, but predominantly spiritual. Talwar is mainly a spiritual seeker and a practicing karma yogi who happened to be a professional banker. On the first day of his assumption of the office as chairman, he called Mr. N. Waggle to his room and offered him the post of his secretary, which he accepted with delight. He sat with him to discuss as to what they should be doing and what should be their priorities. During the course of the conversation, Mr. N. Waggle remarked, "Sir, during your tenure as chairman, we should ensure." He immediately stopped him and said, "Waggle, never again bring this phase during my tenure. I, as an individual, do not matter. I can never let the thought enter into my mind that I am the doer. I am here in the office because of the divine will, and my duty is to serve him and obey his command." These are some of the learnings from Rajkumar Talwar sir's life. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, students, for that narration. I am sure these glimpses from Mr. R.K. Talwar's life are enough to tell us that how different the person was. Mr. Narayan Wagul, a former chairman of ICICI, has written a book on Shri R.K. Talwar, and very fondly he has given a lot of anecdotes about Mr. R.K. Talwar. The book is available. Maybe you can have a copy and then go through the book completely. That will give you the insight into the great personality Mr. R.K. Talwar was. Two incidences that I recollect. The first one is when he graduated from Lahore University in mathematics with highest numbers, the topper of the university at that time, and got an opportunity to go for an interview for the Imperial Bank in Kolkata. The interview was next day and he wanted to see where the interview is. When he went there, the peon at that location asked him why he is here, and he mentioned that I will be coming for the interview tomorrow. So the peon said that, "What is your father?" He said, "What is the question related to?" He said, "No, there is a customary that the people whose the sons of the great fathers only get recruitment in this bank." And with this comment from the person inside the bank, Mr. Talwar went for the interview next day. The credentials and the mark sheet and the other documents were so impressive that the bank could not say no to him. He went with very little hope of getting a job, but he landed with a job of probationary officer, and that was the history that made the history, that he became chairman of the bank in the same bank. And then without discouragement, he dedicatedly gave his 100%, and that's how he became he could cross that hurdle and came to the position which was highest. During the restructuring of State Bank of India, they wanted a professional help. For professional help, the bank had approached McKinsey. That time McKinsey did not have the office in India. To do a feasibility study, McKinsey demanded $1 million to just do the feasibility study, whether they can take this assignment or not. Looking at the amount that they had quoted, Mr. R.K. Talwar decided to go to Mr. Mathai, who was then director of IMA, and IMA helped them in creating the restructuring of State Bank of India. No fancy ideas, doable, and the most important aspect that he has made several young officers who came under his spell and looked up to him for inspiration and guidance. As mentioned in the documentary, the divine boon or the divine hand that he felt for himself and accepted everything as the blessings, I think that made him also tolerant to the environment that he was in. I'm sure these incidences are not only showing the mettle that he had, but also the concern for people around and the country at large. I know the personality is very old, and I really do not know in the audience is anyone else who can speak about the learnings and the interactions with Mr. Talwar. If anyone wants to speak about or to give any comment about Mr. R.K. Talwar, you are welcome to do that. You may raise your hand and you can talk about it. In the meantime, let me also share with you that he served during the period when the concept of banking was undergoing a major shift. And this suited his strong patriotic feeling and nationalistic sentiment to make the changes that are required for making it to the masses. And he took it as a missionary zeal, and his sharp intellect and forcefulness of this personality was very instrumental to lead this, to spearhead this activity. And we are seeing now the fruits of that activity, which was undertaken few years back. I will invite if someone has any comments. You all know that this series of, yes sir, Pankaj Trivedi sir.
Yeah, no, just I wanted to put it that Mr. R.K. Talwar's life, when the students have narrated in front of us, and his professional career and all that, even we also can learn many things. One of the incidents which the students has covered, Galaxy A31, please go on mute, please. Yeah. So one of the incidents that is put up, that eating outside, a small event, but how much importance it is telling to us. So this is something which all of us have to learn. And the other things which I have noted from the narration that is given, one photograph where Mr. Talwar is kind of extending the loan or something to a rural lady, that photo was showing that. So today we are talking about financial inclusion. Today we are talking about helping the masses in the rural areas, giving importance to small scale industry. But look at the foresight of Mr. R.K. Talwar, that in late 70s and 80s, he was doing all these things through the banking network. So that is something which is very, very remarkable. So this is what I could not stop myself to put, madam. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Trivedi. That is really a very important aspect, because when we talked about not for classes but for masses, how to reach out to them and how can the people of the country can benefit from the banking scenario is another. I am struck by the idea that we have been discussing in this field of celebrating Indian managers. I think three of our managers we have discussed are coming from the undivided India. Dr. K.S. Basu, Prakash Tandon, during his session also, we had seen that he was all over, all his writings were related to Punjab. And now the third personality, which is Mr. R.K. Talwar, is also coming from undivided India and Punjab, Lahore, and that part. The book also mentions that there are many people who came from that area, and one prominent name that is coming up in the book is Ramanand Tirth, who also devoted his life for the well-being of the society. And you know that in Maharashtra we have the university which is named after Shri Ramanand Tirth University. So there was some environmental issues, or there was some thing in the environment during that period where people were charged with similar aspirations which were actually for the country, not for the self. This similarity between all the three managers is very, very interesting, and I think we can further delve into this for some further research. I will request now our mentors, Shri Indrapalji, Professor Mr. Ernest Fernandez and Walter Vieira to give their comments also, so that we can have another perspective from the veterans of this management field. Over to you, sir.
Dr. Kavita, I'd just like to make a few comments. May I?
Yes, please.
Yeah. Well, what I'd like to say is that the young people of our country today are looking out for role models. And I think that this presentation today, when we look at Mr. Talwar's life, is such a wonderful example of a role model. Because today, I think there's a lot of disillusionment when we read the papers, the various scams, and even the National Stock Exchange, what is going on. And there's a tendency of the young people of today to think that this was always around. All these things have been there for a long time. But that's not a fact. When we see the life of the Indian managers with the difference, we realize that the India we have today will be built on the broad shoulders of a number of people in various walks of life who not only had skills, but also had values. In fact, today the subject of business ethics has now been introduced in our curriculum in Indian universities, which is only about 20 years old. And Professor Chakraborty, who has researched it, points out that Indian managers today are good in skills, good in banking skills, computer skills, marketing skills. But what there seems to be some lacking in is values. And values are not something which exactly can be taught. They have got to be caught. And that is why, looking at this series, I think there are a lot of values which emerge from the life of Mr. Talwar and the other Indian managers in this series. A small point about the fact that today the banking system is saddled with a huge amount of NPAs. One wonders if we had more Mr. Talwars, whether we would have ever landed the banking system in this state of affairs. If we had more Mr. Talwars, I think they would have been able to stand up and point out that loans should not have been given to people because of influence, which is today causing quite a lot of problems in the banking system. Maybe when I'll just make a few, I would like to say that when we look at the life of Mr. Talwar, he started off, as Dr. Kavita said, in undivided India. But in those years, when the whole banking business was emerging, it was, I think that there were no trained personnel, there were no management institutes. Technology was very weak. We did not have good technology. We had only the telephone, We only had facts. We did not have, what we all today are so used to. And yet they were able to function, and they were able to innovate, and they were able to create systems which today are holding us in such good stead. And India has probably one of the largest banking systems in the whole world. Imagine State Bank of India having 2,300 branches, which is really mind-boggling to have there's no other country in the world which have had so many branches. And obviously, if you've got so many branches, you are serving millions of Indians in very small areas. Whereas in many other parts of the world, the banking system is largely confined to the urban areas. Whereas here we have banks in many small rural areas, which is all, I think, to the credit of the fact that the foundation was laid by gentlemen like Mr. Talwar. So once again, I would like to say that this question of values, which Mr. Talwar's life is a good example of, is I'd like to say that some of the things we have learned today, including me, who was born in undivided India, I never knew this about Mr. Talwar. And so I would like to thank the students who are having enlightened me on Mr. Talwar's life, which is a source of great inspiration.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. The series that we started was with the purpose that the young professionals should know about some personalities who have really made difference. And the book that we mentioned in the beginning was written by Mr. N. Narayan Bagul. And in his introduction, he is saying that why should I write the book? And he says, I quote, "My belief was that this would be useful, particularly to those young minds who are struggling to find a sense of purpose and meaning in an environment marked by chaos and confusion." I think we also started in the similar direction as the managers who were strong enough to stand by their values, by their thinking, and how the confusion and chaos situations made them stronger and made them stand by their thinking and by their philosophy, and they made a difference to the lives which are around them. The whole purpose of this series was same as the book. The book is very small, just 90 pages, but I think it is worth going through each and every page, because every page gives another dimension of Mr. R.K. Talwar, which is very, very required in this chaotic world. And we talk that this is VUCA world, but that VUCA world can be converted into values, then similar kind of positivity that can come to the individual and to the society. I'll request Indrapalji to give his comments.
Yeah. I must thank our students who did a wonderful job with limited material availability. And as Kavita ji had mentioned, since he was at a point of time where not many people who worked with me may be available, or they're no longer there here with us. So with such lack of information, they built a superb kind of lessons they've culled out, which they presented in the video. The second point I want to make is what Kavita just mentioned, that what was so special about Lahore. So if you really make a list of Lahore, it had two famous colleges. One was the Ferguson College, one was Government College. And if you look at the luminaries which have emerged from, say, both of these colleges and who are exceptionally well known, I think the entire senior officer cadres of Indian Army, Indian Air Force, and particularly were from Lahore region. Air Marshal Arjun Singh, Air Marshal Sivdev Singh, and there are so many other, some General Harbakh Singh, and so on and so forth. They all were educated in Government College, Lahore, and they have rose to, fantastic situations, very high positions in their life. The other point is that these people have withstood the test of time, in the sense that their values were so strong. I mean, if you look at the lives of these officers, similar lessons would come about. Then also about Mr. Talwar, I came to know about him when Karan Thapar in in Hindustan Times weekly column, he wrote about Mr. Talwar, a very brief thing. And what he had mentioned something about was that in the emergency era, the politicians were asked to bend. And he said they had crawled. I don't know who had made that comment, but it was a very famous comment made by somebody that they were asked to bend, but they crawled. But as we have seen, Mr. Talwar refused to not even bend, but he stood up. And in a way, he won against the oppressive regime of that time. Also, I had known some few incidents about the restructuring of State Bank of India from IIM professors, IIM Ahmedabad professors, S.K. Bhattacharya, particularly, and Professor Dayal, who were involved in this. And they used to mention, somewhere in the seminars and so on, give reference to what kind of work was being done. And I think among the restructuring exercises done, this restructuring of State Bank of India stands out as one of the wonderful example that what Indian minds can do. And we can give McKinsey and BCG's, run for the money. Yeah. So Mr. Talwar's exemplary life is not really researched much, and it's somebody from the academics or someone connected with business history is looking for a leader to research. He's a right candidate. I'm sure there is much more to him. Mr. Vagu had worked with him, so probably he can throw some light. But even in the archives of State Bank of India in Calcutta, there may be a lot more material. It can be investigated, those who are interested. But for the time, I think the book that Kavitaji has mentioned should be made some sort of a compulsory reading for the young students. I mean, look at courage and courage of character and being able to stand up to the highest authority in the country itself is a wonderful thing. So I think overall, it was a fantastic session, and I think had far more valuable lessons than this thing. In our company itself, we had experienced State Bank of India's office had come up, the corporate office, and we had quoted for furniture supply. But then he said, no, I don't want any steel in our offices. He had opted for wooden furniture, I think, which was there for, I think, many, many years. I don't know whether it is still there or not. But he had his own ideas. Computerization also, he was a champion. Northeast sector banking, State Bank was pioneer. And I think somebody traces the number of branches opened during his tenure, the rural branches particularly, it could be the highest. So I think he is the right topic to be researched further. I don't know what happened to his family and other things, but somebody can research. And I think, we talk about research in management institutes and so on, and this could be an apt topic to bring to fore, when telephone banking has become a kind of a norm, and our current government is trying to stop it. You look at the ABG shipyard fiasco that we see, 25,000 crore debt, etc. So integrity and honesty can only save us. So these are the few comments from my side.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much.
If a legend has to be defined as a person who can be distinguished from the average mankind by his ability to apply structures that reveal a moral definition to events, providing meaning that lifts them above the repetitions and constraints of average human lives, giving them a universality that makes them worth repeating for many generations, Mr. R.K. Talwar would certainly qualify to be called as the banking legend. There was a class behind every activity.
Kavitaji, one small point I forgot to mention. In the science field of science, Dr. Santi Swarup Bhatnagar also hailed from one of the colleges, the Government College Lahore, under whom the highest award is instituted, Bhatnagar, Santi Swarup, Dr. Santi Swarup Bhatnagar Award in the scientific field.
So I think you have given
like you rightly mentioned, that area in erstwhile undivided India had roots, but there was education there, and I think it was kind of a vanguard region which has produced. And I think, if my memory serves right, even Dr. Abdus
Kalam, who, not Abdul Kalam, but the Abdus Kalam, the Nobel Prize winner, mathematician or physicist from Pakistan, had also studied in same Lahore College that we mentioned. And likewise, I think the early years of Dr. Hargobind Khobrana were also probably in that college. So I suppose we have lost a lot in the undivided India in terms of intellectual giants, that we can be proud of.
Sir, I think this gives another topic for discussion and topic for research also. Maybe sometime we will try and find out the great people from the territories and try to find out the characteristics of those territories which is imbibed by the individuals and it is coming out from these great personalities. More than his achievements, the reputation of honesty and integrity enjoyed by him in the industry drew the admiration of everyone, and both the government and the Reserve Bank of India listened to him with respect, and his views on banking issues and generally were recognized, and he was considered as the spokesperson of the industry. Mr. R.K. Talwar died in 2002, as mentioned in the documentary also. I think in the book it is mentioned that he had 2 sons, and these 2 sons are also have contributed to the book that Mr. Narayan Vagul has written. Today, we have seen Mr. R.K. Talwar, a person who made changes in the industry, in the banking industry, and has marks of him. When we are looking at it at 2021, also we can see the values that he had imbibed in the banking industry and people whom he has touched. There are many anecdotes by the people who were around him, young managers who got direction for their careers. One simple incident which is coming, that a person from banking, when Mr. R.K. Talwar had retired, met him in one of the hotels and mentioned to him that I got promotion in banking. That time Mr. Talwar mentioned to him that why do you pursue the career in banking, instead you go and join the industry. And the person joined the industry and he rose to the highest level, and that mention also is there. The vision or the ability to understand the capacity of a person and guiding them to their highest level, I think makes him different and separate. Mr. Vagul has very rightly mentioned all these things in his book. In fact, yesterday evening only I spoke to him. He had some medical appointment, otherwise he would have joined us today to talk about Mr. R.K. Talwar, but nonetheless, some other time we will invite Mr. Narayan Vagul and interact with him on the topic and other topics also. Thank you very much, Dr. Pankaj Trivedi, Madam Monica Khanna, Director K J Somaiya, and all other faculty members and students who have taken efforts to create this, though the series is having some different format, but because of the unavailability of the experts from the industry who can speak their experiences and their learning from Mr. R.K. Talwar was not available, we have resorted to this kind of documentary this time, but we will continue with our original format for other personalities. Next month, we will be having our usual format where we will get people to talk on documentary as well as in person in the webinar. And thank you all. Thank you, Indrapalji. Thank you, Fernandez sir, for your support. I am not sure whether Walter Vieira sir is also there in this webinar. If he is there, we can listen to him. I think he is unable to join. We will stop here. Today, we had seen in the series of celebrating Indian managers who made a difference, Mr. R.K. Talwar, the former chairman of State Bank of India. Next time, we will be meeting another personality and we will learn from that personality and see how relevant the personality and the teachings are in today's time also. On 25th, you may be aware that we are having the Central Minister Shri Nitin, who will be talking to us at 5 o'clock on 25th of February, 5 o'clock. Do join us at 5. We will be having this webinar on WebEx, not on Zoom, as the requirement of the ministry. The information about that event is also there on our website, is also there in our WhatsApp groups. Do join us on 25th to listen to the minister, who is going to elaborate on the expectation the industry and the managers have for building the nation. Don't forget to log on to Bombay Management Association's YouTube channel. We have a lot of learning material there. Please subscribe it, like it, become members of Bombay Management Association. We have many exciting projects for you. Let us be together in this journey of developing management around us. Thank you so much for being with us, and have a good evening today. Bye.
Yes. Thank you, madam. Thank you, Fernandez sir and Indrapal sir. Thank you for giving perspective. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
That's it.
Madam, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.